So as we grapple with the question of war and as we question war, let's hear from a couple of people that went into and came out of the war machine. Veterans. Fitting, right? I mean, what the hell is a Veterans Day episode without speaking to some actual veterans? First up, Jake Bridge is a conscientious objector and member of IVAW, Iraq Veterans Against War, formerly a Marine officer. Jake sat down with us to discuss conscientious objection, the Empire's bloody hands, and how his journey began not with how we wage war on others, but in fact with how we treat our own. Take a look. So, conscientious objector, what part of the armed forces were you in, and what brought you to become a conscientious objector?
Long story short, I was in the Marines. I joined the Marines in 2011. I had gone to college, and I did ROTC training. I commissioned in 2011 when I graduated, and then over the next 3 or 4 years, I saw enough to make me want to file for conscientious objection and get out of the military early, and I got out this past May. For the most part, I kind of saw a big division in the military itself between the haves and the have-nots. And 9 times out of 10, the haves, which was the group I was a part of, would not help the have-nots. And I started thinking, well, if in the military, with our own people, if we can't even help our own people, we don't even treat our own people humanely, then how are we doing overseas when we're dealing with a culture we don't understand, who speaks a different language, has a totally different context? Are we actually treating them well? Especially when we're out there to kill some of them. Are we making the right decisions? And I started looking critically at it, and it was obvious to me that we weren't.
And by the haves and have-nots, do you mean have-nots in terms of your fellow people in the armed forces, like how we've sort of pushed the veterans aside, or do you just also mean the American people?
So to break it down really simply, in the military, there's 2 types of ranks, basically. There's the officers, and there's the enlisted. Officers are the managers. They do a lot of the paperwork. They are the platoon commanders. They're the ones that are in charge, essentially. Almost all the time, officers are the ones in charge. And they are officers because they have a college degree. It's a prerequisite. You have to have a college degree. And the numbers from officers to enlisted in the entire military is about 1 officer for every 5. So you have a small cadre of people who are in charge. Not only that, but at the lowest rank in the officer level, and the lowest rank in the enlisted level, the lowest ranking officer from the get-go makes about $3,000 a month. An enlisted person makes about $1,500. So already there's 50%. And that, as time goes on, as ranks increase, that doesn't stay together. That gets bigger and bigger. So it goes from 50% to 55 and 60 and so on. So that's what I mean when I say the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of a microcosm and sort of intensifies the same thing that you see in the country as a whole, like the disparity between, the people that have money and the people that don't, the well-educated and the non-educated. So it's interesting that it's sort of like that microcosm. So speaking of the conscientious objector, how does that work? What is the process of becoming a conscientious objector?
All told, the application process itself took 10 months. And then from that, after the 10-month period was over and they said, yes, you can get out, I was out a month later. So it was about 11 months. But it's a really long process because you have to build an application and answer questions like, what are your beliefs? Why are they incompatible with military service? When did they become incompatible? Because in a volunteer organization, the assumption is you joined wanting to be a part of this. So everybody's question first is, well, why'd you join? And that's a tough question to answer, but it's kind of simple when you look at it. Well, divorce is a similar thing. Why'd you get married if you got divorced? It's a similar thing, but it's more complex because, again, it's based on war, ideology, and all this. So you have to write an application, again, with all your beliefs, stating them, what they are, why they change, why they're incompatible. You have to provide letters on your behalf for a statement of character from people you know or couldn't say, yeah, this person is changing. You have to have a psych eval, a eval with the chaplain. You have to have an investigating officer come and look over all the paperwork and make their decision on it. Then it gets routed through your chain of command up to your boss's boss, his boss, and then finally all the way to the headquarters of the military service that you're in. And then they do their own judicial review and make their own decision. Ostensibly, they can make their own decision without anybody else's input. If everybody else says yes, they can go ahead and say no if they want. So it's a really, really long process. And the whole time, you're just waiting.
And so what happens if somebody says no? What position are you in then?
In my process, I had my boss and the boss above him both said no. But above them, they said yes. So it's kind of more an ego hit than anything else if somebody says no below the commanding authority, below the top authority, because they have the final say. If the top authority says no, your options are suck it up and just keep doing your job, or you can apply again, or there are other options that are a lot less favorable, like stop going to work, and then you end up in jail, or you can flee the country, you can try to get out of your service that way, but this is the only legal recourse really for somebody who feels that way.
Geez, well, I'm glad that the people above them said yes.
Yeah.
What do you feel that that really needs to change in this system? I mean, I would say specifically foreign policy, but things come back to domestic policy as well. What do you think really needs to change for you to be proud of the fact that you served, or perhaps even consider joining again at some point?
Well, one of the reasons I joined was because this was supposed to be the moral and ethical, especially in the Marines, supposed to be emphasized, the morality and the ethics of the Marine Corps. And then the officer community is supposed to be the community that leads that charge. They're supposed to be the mentors and the teachers and the moral ethical experts, if you will, because they're supposed to have a college degree and they're supposed to have more experience, at least intellectually, to be able to do that. I would like to see a focus on that, and I would like to see people, they do case studies in the military. I wish they would, where they would look at failed missions, where they would look at the Kunduz operation where they just blew up a hospital, or all these other atrocities that happen, where they actually take a hard look at it. Why is this horrible? Why can't we do this? How do we prevent this from happening again? Not just at the high levels, but at the lower level, to show the junior enlisted members and even the low-ranking officers, or just to even test our morality as we go. This is unacceptable. We cannot do this. But that's not at all what happens at that level. What happens at the lower levels is you have a job to do, you do the job, you go home. You come back the next morning, you do the same thing over and over and over again. There's no emphasis on developing your moral and ethical character, or even your spiritual character. And when I first got in, I saw that there was the emphasis on physical training and the emphasis on mental training, which is just, learn your tactics, your strategies, maybe get a college degree while you're working. But there was nothing else about we need to work on how to make decisions under stress in these ethical and moral frameworks. So I would love to see a return to that, a focus on that, to actually look at these horrible things that happen, own them, acknowledge that we are responsible, but then saying this is why they can't happen. This is how they negatively affect our image around the world, and they do opposite. They create more angst, more anger, more violence than they kill.
So if you're looking for an alternative to support the troops, how about support the people? Has a nice all-inclusive, no-nonsense feel to it, and it certainly applies to the veterans chewed up and spit out by the war machine. Or Armistice Day, the celebration of the end of World War I in 1918. Veterans for Peace will be holding vigils and events across the country today in honor of Armistice Day. And as they put it, to remember this day's original purpose. For more information on that, go to veteransforpeace.org. And to learn more about Iraq Veterans Against War, check out ivaw.org.